So good afternoon. My name is Kevin Carpenter. I'm a volunteer with Cppcon, and I'm fortunate enough to have Titus Winters with us today to talk to us about his upcoming talks at the convention. And Titus, you've been with Google for quite a while, but why don't you let everybody know a bit about yourself?
Yeah, I'm Titus. Yeah, like you said, I've been at Google for a little over 8 years now. Almost all of that has been involved with our C++ libraries in various ways. I was one of the founding members on our C++ library team for 5 or 6 years. I led that and got that team up to like 10-ish people. I founded Abseil a few years ago and launched that publicly with the keynote at last year's Cppcon. I'm a standards committee member for the last few years. As of, I guess, this year, I don't know, sometime recently, I'm now the chair of the Library Evolution Working Group. That's the subcommittee that does the design work for standard library components. And I'm also chairing the new study group on tooling, which seems to be mostly focusing right now on build systems and dependency management, and eventually things like static analysis and refactoring tooling and things like that.
All really good stuff. I can imagine that, so your talk that you have is on modern C++ design, and I can imagine that talk with all of your experience, what you're going to be able to bring to it with depth.
Yeah, so I have 2 talks actually this year. The first one is this modern C++ design. It is a 2-parter on Monday, I think. And this is a lot of things that I've been working on over the last year and a half. I presented some of this at C++ Now for a much smaller audience. And some of, I had a very important to me blog post earlier in the summer on regular types and design there. But I think overall, the 2 parts, I think the first part will be sort of micro design, like how do you pass parameters? What does it mean? What are the basic units of design? Talking a lot about overload sets and move semantics and all of those sorts of nice things. And then the second part will get into more sort of families of good design for families of types. Types of types is not quite the right term, but there's classes of good design going from the things that everyone is familiar with, like value types, like string and vector, to things that I think are only now sort of wrapping our head around how do we design these well, like string view and other sort of non-owning reference parameter types.
Yeah, I'm excited actually to hear about some of those because, to your point, even where I work now, we use the standard library a lot with the basic types and value types, but seeing things like string view, we happen to do data processing, and we're looking forward to what that can offer. But as you're saying, the implementation of it and how you use it, I think will be, you want to make sure you use it right.
Yeah, you want to make sure you use it right, and you want to make sure that if you are using that as a reference for designing your own things, like span, for instance, or type erasing, I see people building type erased non-owning reference types for passing in associative containers. Like I need a map view of string to int or something. And I don't actually care what map is under the hood. It could be a map, a small map, a hash map, or whatever. But maybe I want a parameter type like that. And there are things that will go better if you sort of know how to think about the design and know what are the places where there are pitfalls. Because sort of the old rules about regular types don't quite match. But they're still what we should be aiming for. And a lot of what I think I contributed over the last few months is coming up with ways to not throw away everything that we know to be good, but to still be able to describe how to design in a good way for this new use case, or for this sort of more modern, trendy use case.
Yeah, absolutely. I definitely seen places where, I tried to pick up a new technology or a new way of doing something, and, without having the experience, you can write yourself into a corner if you're not careful.
Yep. And in a lot of these cases, like if you design the thing wrong, it may take quite a while for the way that it goes wrong to become clear. And at that point, you have users, and it may be spread throughout your code base or throughout throughout code bases of your users and places that you can't even see, and it may be too hard to fix it. So in type design, as with many things, but especially with type design, you need to measure twice, cut once. Be sure you know what you're doing.
Absolutely. So you've also got a talk, which is the Standard Library Compatibility Guidelines.
Yes. This is so the standards committee. The primary document that we put out is, of course, the standard itself. But there are a handful of additional sort of supplemental things called standing documents, and you can find those on isocpp.org. And the standing documents tend to serve slightly different purposes. They're not quite normative. They're not necessarily voted on in the same ISO national body fashion. And in particular, because of the work that I've been doing for the last year or so, the committee voted out a new standing document over the summer called SD8 on Standard Library Compatibility Guidelines. And this has sort of just been a pet peeve of mine that if you ask any non-committee members, what is and is not allowed for a user to do to the standard library, no two people are going to give you the same list, and few of those lists actually match how the committee has been voting, for instance. And so the SD8 talk, the compatibility guidelines talk, is largely about the idea that the new standing document is the committee saying, these are the things that we reserve the right to do when we are making changes to the standard library in the future. And that starts with really easy, obvious things like, we're going to add stuff to namespace stood. And then I will get into the things that your code can't or maybe shouldn't do given that right that we are reserving. So in that case, clearly you shouldn't be opening namespace stood and adding your own things there, right? That's not going to go well in the long run. But at the same time, this is not undefined behavior or any of those scary words. This is, if you want it to be easy to upgrade from one language version to the next, right? If you want your code to be future compatible, these are the best practices and things that you need to follow. If you throw all of this away and you happen to get your code to work, so long as you don't touch anything, you don't upgrade your compiler, you don't try to change standard libraries, any of those things, yeah, it works. That doesn't make it good, right? And so the talk is, some of this is what the committee reserves the right to do, but also some of me just, reminding everyone there's a difference between it works and it's actually correct, and, things like that. So
do you think that's gotten worse as a problem as we started to hit modern C++ and the libraries have grown, we're getting more technical specs in?
Yeah, I think it's gotten a lot worse. Well, maybe it's not that it's gotten worse, but it's become more acute, I think, because largely, I think, because of the period where the standard wasn't changing, right? I believe that one of the thermodynamic truths of software engineering is what we refer to as Hiram's law. It's this notion that with a sufficient number of users, everything that can be depended upon is depended upon by somebody. And when the standard stood still for so long, there were so many things that you could get to work that the compilers, weren't warning you about, weren't forbidding. that you could, build whole tech stacks that were just depending on that particular weird thing, whatever it might be. And now, as we try to like push things forward, trying to like reinstill momentum, trying to like undo some of that like baggage. They say a rolling stone gathers no moss. The standard stopped rolling for 10 years. That's sort of tough in some respects. And so this is part of my ongoing effort to find the balance between API producers and API consumers. Like this is a two-way street.
And are you on the build panel as well this year?
Yes. So there's a evening discussion. I forget exactly when that is. I think it's an evening discussion. I haven't checked my schedule.
I think it's Thursday night, actually.
Thursday night. All right. It's Thursday night. Yeah. And I think I'm doing that primarily because of my involvement with SG15, the tooling study group, to discuss like issues of like, hey, we don't actually have one true build system, and all of our builds are cray. So,
yeah, that is definitely a case. I'm looking forward to that one because even at the new place where I'm at, it's a struggle that we're working with for sure.
Yeah.
So you've been to all of the Cppcons, presented at most all of them. So I want to hit you up with what do you think is tips for attendees to help you really get a lot out of it.
Cppcon is by far the biggest concentration of C++ expertise anywhere. If you have the opportunity to go, like absolutely go. Clearly the speaker lineup is unparalleled, and if there's a talk that is interesting, like yeah, you should try to go to like lots of talks. But it is certainly also the case that it is the largest gathering of C++ as a community. So it is also a chance to chat with the committee members and the experts that are not on the committee. And to the extent that whatever we're guessing it to be, 5 million person community globally, as fractured and bizarre as the C++ world is, to the extent that it is a community, this is the meeting for that. And I strongly encourage people, like, don't be afraid of people that say, like, oh, hey, I'm a committee member. Like, it's important for committee members to hear from, the user base. And it's important for the users to discuss things with themselves, with each other. So go to talks, but also just meet people. The hallway can be useful. Certainly bars and restaurants in the neighborhood are an important adjunct to the conference itself.
Do you have any particular talks you're looking forward to that are on the schedule when you're not doing your own?
I have many that I'm looking forward to. The one that comes to mind most, unfortunately, is scheduled against my SD8 talk, which is Ben Dean is doing a talk on declarative style. And this is a little bit of a reprise of his excellent talk from C++ Now earlier in the summer. That was a spectacular talk, and I would be very glad to go sit in on that again if I wasn't scheduled against it. Yeah, I don't know. The lineup looks good. So.
It's funny you say that because there's definitely that factor of, there's for every talk that I want to go see, there's one pretty much right next to it that I'll at least be happy that things get recorded and made available later, but it doesn't really, not the same as being in the talk sometimes.
No, it really isn't.
So we're down to like, next week, I know I'm flying up. I'm excited to get there for some early pre-conference classes. And I'm looking forward to seeing your talks from you there because I'll definitely be able to make use of the design information.
I hope
so, yeah, thank you very much for your time this afternoon. We really appreciate it.
Yep, absolutely. My pleasure. I'll see you all in Bellevue.
Thanks, Titus.
Thanks. Bye.